The transport ship dropped through Velthornine's red atmosphere like a stone falling into blood. Lieutenant Hana pressed her forehead against the cold window and watched the planet's surface grow closer. Rust-colored deserts stretched forever beneath clouds that looked like old bruises. This was her third assignment to a failing colony world, but something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the silence on the radio. Maybe it was the way the pilot kept checking his fuel levels like a nervous habit. Colony Station 7 appeared on the horizon as a cluster of gray domes half buried in crimson sand. Defense turrets stuck up from the ground like broken teeth. Hana counted only 4 of them still moving, tracking the sky for threats. The database said there should be 12. She made a note in her pad but didn't ask questions. The pilot already looked scared enough. The landing was rough. Sand scraped against the hull with sounds like fingernails on metal. When the door finally opened, hot wind filled the cabin and brought the smell of rust and something else. Something that reminded Hana of electrical storms. Station Commander Tiemann waited at the bottom of the ramp with 2 guards. He was younger than she expected, maybe 30, with tired eyes that had seen too much. "Welcome to 7, Tiemann said. His voice was flat. "Try not to stay too long." Hana shouldered her pack and followed him through the sand. The guards kept their rifles pointed at the ground, but their fingers never left the triggers. Around the station's perimeter, she saw the scorch marks. Long claw scratches in the metal walls. Dark stains that could have been blood or fuel or both. "The Velthrin?" Tiemann explained without her asking. "They hit us every 3 or 4 days. Lost 6 people last month. Another 3 the week before you arrived." He stopped at a heavy door and waited for it to grind open. "Your job is to figure out why they keep coming. Command thinks maybe we're near a breeding ground or something. Personally, I think they just hate us." The station inside was cleaner than Hana expected, but emptier. Hallways built for 50 people now echoed with maybe 20 sets of footsteps. Most doors were sealed shut to save power. The cafeteria served ration packs on plastic trays. Nobody talked much during meals. They ate like soldiers in a war zone, fast and focused. Always listening for alarms. Hana spent her first week studying the colony database on Velthrin behavior. The entries were mostly guesswork and fear. Creatures with 6 legs and crystalline fur that caught light like broken glass. Pack hunters with razor claws and teeth that could punch through body armor. Intelligence level, unknown. Communication, unknown. Reason for aggression, unknown. The file photos showed dark shapes caught in motion, blurred by speed and distance. Not one clear image of a living Velthrin existed in the entire database. On her 8th day, Hana convinced Tiemann to let her run environmental surveys outside the walls. He argued for an hour about the risk before finally agreeing to give her 4 hours with an armed escort. The guard's name was Minho, a researcher who'd been at 7 for 6 months. He carried his rifle like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "Stay close," Minho said as they walked into the crimson wastes. "And if I say run, you run? Don't look back. Don't ask why. Just run." They covered 3 kilometers of nothing but red sand and rocks that looked like frozen glass. Hana took soil samples and air readings while Minho watched the horizon. The sun beat down like a hammer. Sweat soaked through her shirt before they'd gone half a kilometer. Then Hana heard it. A sound like wind chimes made of crystal, coming from behind a rock formation that rose from the sand like a giant's hand. She moved toward it before thinking. Minho grabbed her arm, but she shook him off gently. The sound came again, softer this time. Not threatening. Almost sad. Behind the rocks, Hana found the nest. 3 small creatures huddled together in a shallow depression. They were the size of house cats, covered in fur that sparkled even in shadow. 6 legs each, exactly like the database described, but their faces were different from the blurred photos. Large eyes that caught the light. Small ears pressed flat against their heads. They made the chiming sound again when they saw her, and Hana realized they were crying. "Oh no," Minho whispered. "We need to leave. Now, the mother will come back and—" "The mother is dead," Hana said quietly. She pointed to the automated defense turret visible on the ridge above them. Its barrel was still aimed at the rocks. Below it she could see the body. A larger Velthrin, torn apart by high-caliber rounds. The sand around it was dark and wet. The cubs made their sound again. They were so small. Their crystalline fur was matted with dust, and their sides moved fast with frightened breathing. One of them tried to stand on shaky legs and fell over. Hana's chest hurt watching them. "We have to go," Minho said. His voice was urgent now. "If the pack finds us here, they're starving," Hana interrupted. She was already opening her pack, pulling out emergency rations. "Look at them. They're babies. They'll die out here alone. That's not our problem." "Yes, it is." Hana unwrapped a protein bar and broke it into small pieces. The cubs watched her with those large eyes. She tossed a piece toward them. The smallest one sniffed it, then grabbed it with tiny claws and ate. The other two followed. They ate like they hadn't seen food in days. "They probably hadn't. What are you doing?" Minho asked, but his voice was different now, softer. "Something stupid," Hana admitted. She moved closer to the cubs. "They didn't run. Help me get them into my pack." "The commander will lose his mind, probably." They wrapped the cubs in Hana's spare jacket and carried them back to the station. Minho argued the whole way, but he never put them down. When they reached the gate, the guards stared but didn't stop them. News traveled fast in a small colony. By the time they reached Hana's quarters, half the station knew what she'd done. Teeman came to her door within an hour. He stood in the hallway looking at the 3 cubs curled up on her bunk. They'd stopped crying once they were warm and fed. Now they just watched everything with curious eyes. "You know what those things grow into?" Teeman said. "I know what we've been told they grow into," Hana replied. "That's different, is it?" "Yes." Teeman was quiet for a long time. Then he sighed like a man too tired to fight anymore. "Keep them in your quarters. Don't let them near anyone else. If they show any aggression, any at all, I'm spacing them." "Understood?" "Understood." After he left, Hana sat on the floor and watched the cubs explore her small room. They moved carefully, testing everything with their claws and noses. The smallest one found her pilot headgear on the desk and sniffed it carefully. Then it curled up next to the helmet and closed its eyes. Hana smiled despite everything. She named them that night. Sol for the brave one, Nova for the curious one, Echo for the smallest one who liked her headgear. They fell asleep in a pile, their crystalline fur making soft chiming sounds as they breathed. Before she turned out the lights, Hana knelt beside them and put her hand on the helmet. "I wake up at dawn every day," she told them softly. "And every dawn I'll be here with you." "That's a promise." The cubs made a small sound in their sleep, almost like they understood. Hana hoped they did. On Velthra 9, promises were sometimes the only things that kept people alive. 3 weeks passed and the cubs grew fast. They learned to recognize Hana's footsteps in the hallway. Every morning at dawn, they waited by her pilot headgear until she woke up. Then they would make their chiming sounds and climb onto her lap while she fed them. Sol was the boldest, always first to try new foods. Nova liked to investigate everything, constantly getting into supply boxes and toolkits. Echo, the smallest, stayed closest to Hana and followed her everywhere. The station's attitude toward them slowly changed. Minho started bringing them treats he made from his ration packs. The guards stopped gripping their rifles so tight when the cubs wandered past. Even Teeman visited once and let Sol climb onto his shoulder. Nobody talked about spacing them anymore. Hana spent every free hour studying the cubs. She recorded their sounds and realized they weren't random. The chimes changed pitch and pattern based on what the cubs wanted. High and fast meant excited. Low and slow meant tired. A specific warbling sound meant hungry. They were talking. Actually communicating in ways the database said was impossible. She also noticed how they responded to each other. When one cub felt scared, the others came close and their fur would glow softly. When they were happy, all 3 glowed brighter together. They were connected somehow, sharing feelings through their crystalline structures. Hannah filled 3 journals with observations. This wasn't just alien biology. This was something entirely new. On the 23rd day, everything changed. The emergency alarm woke everyone at 0400 hours. Hannah ran to the command center, still pulling on her boots. Tiemann stood at the main console, his face gray. The large screen showed a satellite feed of Haven Prime, the main colony hub 300 kilometers north. Except Haven Prime was barely visible anymore. A massive swarm of Velthrin covered it like a living storm. Thousands of them, Tiemann said quietly. Maybe tens of thousands. They hit the colony 4 hours ago. The shields are failing. Evacuation ships can't launch because the Velthrin tear them apart before they clear the landing pads. Hannah stared at the screen. The Velthrin moved together like a single organism, flowing around buildings and over walls. She could see the flashes of weapons fire, but nothing seemed to slow the swarm down. How many people are trapped? She asked. 8,000 civilians. Maybe 300 military. Tiemann pulled up another screen showing casualty reports. The numbers kept climbing. Colony Command is calling it a total loss. They're recommending we evacuate 7 before the swarm heads this direction. What about shield generators? Hannah asked. If we could boost Haven Prime's shields, the evacuation ships could launch safely. We have generators, Tiemann said, but no way to deliver them. Every ship that tries to get through the swarm dies in minutes. We've already lost 6 pilots. Hannah looked at the satellite feed again. Her mind raced through everything she'd learned from Sol, Nova, and Echo, the way they moved together, the patterns in their communication. The swarm wasn't random chaos. It was coordinated, organized, like a massive version of what she saw in her quarters every day. I can get through, Hannah said. Everyone in the command center turned to look at her. Tiemann shook his head before she could continue. No, absolutely not. I've watched 6 experienced combat pilots die tonight. You're a xenobiologist? You've never even flown in combat conditions. I've flown reconnaissance for 3 years, Hannah countered. And I know something none of those pilots knew. I understand how they move. She pulled up her research files on the main screen. Videos of Sol, Nova, and Echo playing together. Charts showing their communication patterns. Diagrams of how their movements synchronized. They're not just attacking randomly, Hannah explained. They're communicating constantly, moving together based on specific signals. If I can recognize those signals, I can predict where gaps will open in the swarm, where it's safe to fly and where it's not. Tiemann studied the data. His jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. Finally, he looked at her. This is insane. Yes, you'll probably die. Probably. And if you do get through, the landing will be rough. Haven Prime's docking systems are damaged. You might crash, I know. Tiemann was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded once, sharp and final. Prep the supply runner. Load it with every shield generator we have. You launch in 30 minutes. The next half hour passed in a blur. Hannah suited up in her flight gear and ran through pre-flight checks on the supply runner Dawnbreaker. 2 escort fighters would fly with her, piloted by Jiho and Sumin. Both were veterans with years of combat experience. Both looked at Hannah like she was already dead. Before boarding, Hannah went back to her quarters one last time. Sol, Nova, and Echo were awake, agitated by all the alarm sounds. They gathered around her, making worried chiming noises. Hannah knelt and pulled them close. I have to go help some people, she told them softly. It's going to be dangerous, but I promise I'll come back at dawn. Just like always. Wait for me here, okay? Right by my headgear. I'll wake up with you, just like I promised. Echo made a soft sound and pressed against her leg. Nova touched her hand with a paw. Sol climbed onto her shoulder one last time, purring against her neck. Hannah held them for as long as she dared. Then she carefully set them down next to her pilot headgear on the bunk. At dawn, she whispered. I promise. The cubs curled around the helmet and watched her leave with their large eyes. Hannah didn't look back. If she did, she might not go. The flight to Haven Prime was 200 kilometers through hell. The moment they entered the swarm's outer edge, Velthrin appeared from everywhere. They flew through the air using wing structures Hannah had never seen before, their crystalline fur creating trails of light. Hundreds of them converged on the three ships immediately. Break formation, Jiho yelled over the radio. Evasive patterns Alpha 7. But Hannah didn't follow the combat manual. She watched the Velthrin's movements and listened to their sounds coming through her ship's external audio. High chimes meant attack formation. Low chimes meant regrouping. A specific warbling pattern meant they were coordinating a pincer movement. It was exactly like watching Sol, Nova, and Echo play, just multiplied by thousands. She saw a gap forming to her left before the Velthrin even moved to create it. She banked hard and dove through the opening. Behind her, Jiho cursed in surprise. "How did you know that would be clear?" he demanded. "I'm listening to them," Hannah replied. She pulled up hard as another attack wave formed, but she'd already heard the signal. She knew where they wouldn't be. For 20 minutes, she danced through the swarm. Her escorts followed her lead, staying in her wake. Jiho and Sumin stopped questioning her decisions and just flew. Every turn Hannah made seemed impossible, but worked. Every dive and climb took them through gaps that appeared moments before they arrived. Then Jiho's fighter took a hit. A Velthrin adult tore through his left engine with claws that glowed in the darkness. His ship spun out of control, trailing fire and smoke. Hannah started to turn back, but Jiho's voice stopped her. "Negative, Dawnbreaker? Complete the mission. Get those generators to Haven Prime." You can save 8,000 people," Jiho interrupted. His voice was calm. "Almost peaceful. That's what humans do. We save each other. Even when it costs everything." His fighter exploded in a ball of fire that scattered the swarm for precious seconds. Hannah used those seconds to dive toward Haven Prime's failing shields. Beside her, Sumin's fighter was barely holding together, its hull covered in claw marks. They broke through the final swarm layer and dove toward the colony. The landing bay was half destroyed, filled with debris and bodies. Hannah aimed for the largest clear space and prayed. The Dawnbreaker hit hard, bounced twice, and slid sideways into a collapsed wall. Metal screamed. Alarms shrieked. Then everything went dark. Hannah woke up to pain everywhere. Her ribs were broken. Something warm ran down her face. Blood. Her hands wouldn't work right. Through the cracked windscreen, she saw people running toward her ship. Sumin's voice crackled over the radio, barely audible. Generators delivered. Shields powering up. "We did it, Hannah. We actually did it." Hands pulled Hannah from the wreckage. A medic named Hygiene pressed something soft against her head wound and told her to stay awake. But Hannah was so tired. Her eyes kept closing. Someone said her skull was fractured. Internal bleeding. Critical condition. Hygiene's face was serious and scared. "Put her in medical stasis," someone ordered. "It's the only chance." Hannah tried to speak but couldn't. Her last thought before darkness took her was of 3 small cubs curled around a pilot's headgear, waiting for dawn. Waiting for a promise she might not be able to keep. The medical bay at Haven Prime smelled like antiseptic and fear. Hannah floated in a suspension tank filled with blue fluid that kept her broken body alive. Machines breathed for her. Monitors tracked her failing organs. Medic Hygiene checked the readings every hour, and her face got more worried each time. The advanced medical equipment they needed was on a supply ship, still 3 days away. Maybe 4 if the shipping lanes had more swarm activity. Hannah's chances of surviving that long were barely 14%. Back at Colony Station 7, dawn came and Hannah didn't wake up. Sol, Nova, and Echo stayed exactly where she'd left them, curled around her pilot headgear. Minho brought them food, but they wouldn't eat. He brought water, and they only drank a little. They just waited, making soft chiming sounds that got sadder each hour. "Come on, little ones," Minho said softly. He tried to move Echo away from the headgear to clean the bedding, but the small cub made a sharp sound and wouldn't budge. She's coming back. She promised, right? Humans keep promises. But the cubs seemed to know something was wrong. Their crystalline fur lost its glow. They barely moved except to shift positions slightly. By the second day, Minho was seriously worried. He brought Tim in to see them. They're dying, Timan said quietly. He'd seen enough death to recognize it. Grief, maybe. Or they've bonded with Hana so strongly that losing her is like losing part of themselves. Can we do anything? I don't know. Nobody's ever studied Velthrin behavior like this. We've only ever fought them. On the third day, Minho noticed something strange. The cubs were making sounds, but different from before, lower, steadier, a frequency that made his teeth ache if he listened too long. He recorded it and ran the audio through analysis software. The sound was traveling through the station's metal walls, through the ground. Through the very rock of Velthor 9, it was a distress signal. And it was carrying for kilometers. That afternoon, the perimeter alarms started going off. Guards ran to defensive positions expecting an attack. But what they saw through the cameras made everyone freeze. Velthrin were gathering outside Station 7's walls. Dozens at first. Then hundreds. They sat in the red sand and didn't move. Didn't attack? Just sat and watched the station. What are they doing? A guard asked, his rifle shaking in his hands. Minho watched the screens and listened to the cub's signal through his headphones. Then he understood. They're waiting with them. The cubs are calling and the adults are answering. They're sharing the grief. That's impossible, Timan said. They're animals. Pack hunters. They don't have complex emotions. Look at them, Minho replied, pointing at the screen. Really look. The Velthrin outside weren't in attack formations. They weren't hunting or patrolling. They sat in groups, their crystalline fur resonating with the same frequency the cubs broadcast. Occasionally one would make a sound and others would respond. It looked like conversation, like community, like mourning. Minho spent the next day studying everything he could find about Velthrin attacks. The dates, the locations, the triggers, and he found a pattern everyone had missed. Every attack happened near specific geological formations, places where the crystal rock formations were thickest, where resonance would be strongest. They're not just killing us for territory, Minho said during an emergency council meeting. We've been building our colonies on their sacred sites, places where they bond, where they raise their young, where they bury their dead. We've been destroying their most important places and they've been trying to defend them. So what? Someone argued. They're still killing us. Because we didn't understand, Minho shot back. Because we saw monsters instead of people. Hannah understood. She looked at 3 orphaned cubs and saw children, not threats. And now those children are dying because she's dying, and an entire species is mourning outside our walls. The council argued for hours. Some wanted to kill the cubs to stop the signal and drive away the Velthrin gathering outside. Others saw an opportunity for something new, a chance to communicate, to understand. Timan listened to everything and then made his decision. We take the cubs to Haven Prime, he said. To Hana. That's 300 kilometers through hostile territory, someone protested. With a Velthrin army between here and there. The Velthrin aren't the enemy anymore, Timan replied. Our ignorance is. Hannah figured that out. Maybe we should too. He contacted Haven Prime and requested emergency transport for the cubs. The response came back within an hour. Denied. Haven Prime had limited resources and thousands of injured humans. They couldn't spare fuel or personnel for animals, no matter how unusual the situation was. Minho read the message and felt something break inside him. He'd watched Sol, Nova, and Echo for weeks, fed them, but played with them, learned their different personalities. They weren't animals. They were children waiting for their mother to come home. I'm taking them, Minho said quietly. That's unauthorized, Timan replied. But he didn't sound angry. He sounded tired and sad and done with following rules that made no sense. I know. You'll need a ship. And a pilot willing to lose their career. A voice spoke from the doorway. I'll fly. Ji-won stepped into the room. She was a cargo pilot with 15 years' experience and a reputation for taking risks. I've been listening to those cubs cry for 3 days. I'm not listening for a fourth. Tiemann looked at both of them. Then he turned to his console and typed something. The security codes for Hangar Bay 3 will malfunction for approximately 30 minutes, starting at 0200 hours tomorrow. There will be a transport fueled and ready. If someone were to steal it during that malfunction, I probably wouldn't notice until they were long gone. Minho smiled despite everything. Thank you, Commander. Don't thank me. Just get those cubs to Hannah and come back alive. At 0200 hours, Minho and Ji-won carried Sol, Nova, and Echo through the dark station corridors. The cubs were weak now, barely moving. But they still clung to Hannah's headgear like it was the only real thing in the universe. Minho wrapped them carefully in blankets and strapped them into the transport's passenger seats. The ship lifted off quietly and headed north toward Haven Prime. Behind them, the hundreds of Velthrin watching the station stood up as one. Then they started running, following the transport across the crimson wastes. Not chasing, accompanying like an honor guard for something sacred. Ji-won watched them on the rear cameras and shook her head slowly. I've been flying on this planet for 10 years. Seen hundreds of Velthrin attacks. Never saw anything like this. Because we never gave them a reason to show us, Minho replied. He held Echo gently, the small cub barely breathing. We only showed them guns and walls. Hannah showed them kindness. And now they're showing us what loyalty looks like. The flight to Haven Prime took 2 hours. The Velthrin followed for every kilometer, their glowing fur visible in the darkness like stars running across the ground. When Haven Prime's defense systems detected the approaching swarm, alarms screamed. Defense Commander Suyun ordered weapons charged. Incoming hostiles. All defensive positions, prepare to fire. Wait! Civilian Council member Daeon grabbed Suyun's arm. Look at them. Really look. They're not attacking. They're following that transport. It's a trick. They're using it as cover to breach the shields. Or maybe something else is happening here. Something we don't understand. Ji-won's voice crackled over the open channel. Haven Prime, this is Transport 79er. I have 3 Velthrin cubs aboard who are dying. They need to reach Lieutenant Hannah immediately. The swarm following us isn't hostile. They're witnesses. This is a rescue mission, not an attack. Negative, 79er, Suyun replied. You are not cleared for landing. Return to Station 7 immediately or we will shoot you down. Then shoot, Ji-won said calmly. Because I'm not turning around. In the medical bay, Sumin heard the radio chatter. She was still recovering from the mission, her body covered in bandages. But she pulled herself out of bed and limped to the command center. She'd flown through hell with Hana. She'd watched Jiho sacrifice himself. She wasn't going to let bureaucracy kill the woman who'd saved 8,000 lives. Let them land, Sumin said, her voice sharp enough to cut. Hana flew through a swarm of thousands to save this colony. The least we can do is open the door for 3 small aliens who love her. Suyun and Sumin stared at each other. The tension in the command center was thick enough to choke on. Then Daeon stepped between them. Override code accepted, Daeon said, typing rapidly. Opening Shield Gate 7, Transport 79er, you are cleared for emergency landing. Medical Bay direct approach? The shields parted. Ji-won brought the transport down fast and hard, landing directly outside the medical complex. Minho gathered the cubs in his arms and ran. Guards tried to stop him, but Daeon was right behind, ordering them aside. They reached Hana's room in minutes. Hajin started to protest, but stopped when she saw the cubs. They were barely alive, their fur dull and their breathing shallow. But the moment Minho set them on Hana's suspended bed, they moved. Slowly, painfully, they arranged themselves around her body. Sol on her left. Nova on her right. Echo on her chest. and they placed her pilot headgear on the pillow beside her head, exactly where it belonged. Then they started to sing, the same signal they'd been broadcasting for days, but different now. Outside Haven Prime's walls, hundreds of Velthrons settled into waiting positions. They formed rough circles in the red sand, family groups pressed close together. Their crystalline fur pulsed with soft light, all synchronized to the same rhythm as the cub's song inside the medical bay. The colony's defensive weapons tracked them constantly, but nobody gave the order to fire. Something was happening that nobody wanted to interrupt. In the medical bay, Hyjin ran every test she could think of. The results made no scientific sense. Hannah's neural activity was increasing in direct response to the cub's vocalizations. The frequency they produced matched human brainwave patterns almost perfectly. The Velthron were somehow stimulating her nervous system, encouraging her body to heal itself. "It's like they're talking directly to her brain," Hyjin explained to the gathered crowd of doctors and researchers. "Their crystalline structures generate bioelectrical fields that resonate with neural tissue. They're not just calling to her emotionally, they're calling to her biologically. Can we amplify it?" Minho asked. "Use equipment to make the signal stronger?" "Maybe, but I'd need equipment we don't have. The medical ship with advanced gear is still 2 days out." Hyjin checked her monitors again. Hana's vitals were better but still critical. "She's stabilized, but she's not waking up. Whatever the cubs are doing, it's not quite enough." Minho walked to the window overlooking the perimeter. The Velthron masses glowed in the darkness like a field of strange stars. He thought about everything he'd learned in the past week. The way the cubs communicated, the way the adults responded, the crystalline structures that let them share feelings across distances. "What if we use them?" Minho said suddenly. The Velthron outside. "Their crystalline fur resonates with the cub's signal. What if all of them together could amplify it enough?" "You want to let a Velthron swarm near our medical bay?" Suyin demanded. He'd been against this from the start. "That's insane." "Everything about this is insane," Daeon replied. "But it's working. Look at the monitors. Hana is stronger now than she's been in days. If there's even a chance this could save her, we have to try." The debate raged for hours. Medical staff argued with military command. Civilian council members tried to find compromise. Through it all, the cubs never stopped their song, and the Velthron outside never left. Sumin finally ended the argument by walking to the external controls herself. "Hana saved 8,000 lives," Sumin said quietly. Her hand hovered over the button that would open the medical bay's external panel. "Jiho died to get her to this colony. I'm not going to let politics kill her when we have a chance to save her. Everyone who disagrees can file a complaint after she wakes up." She pressed the button. The external panel slid open. Night air filled the medical bay, carrying the smell of rust and crystal and living things. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the Velthron outside responded. They stood as one and moved closer to the colony walls, closer to the open panel. Their fur began to glow brighter, pulsing in perfect synchronization. The cub's song changed, became louder, more complex. The adult Velthron answered with their own sounds, layering frequencies on top of each other like an orchestra tuning together. The air itself seemed to vibrate. Medical equipment flickered as electromagnetic fields washed through the room. Hana floated in darkness, lost in the space between living and dying. She could hear sounds but couldn't understand them. She could feel her body but couldn't move it. Everything was distant and cold. She was so tired. It would be easy to just let go, to drift away into the quiet dark. Then she heard the chiming, familiar and warm, Saul's brave sound. Nova's curious sound, Echo's gentle sound. They were calling to her from somewhere far away, calling her back, calling her home. Other sounds joined them. Hundreds of voices, thousands maybe, all singing together, all pulling at something deep inside her. She remembered making a promise, to wake at dawn, to come back. She remembered 3 small faces watching her leave, waiting by her headgear, trusting her. Humans keep their promises, even when it hurts, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Hana fought toward the sound, through pain that felt like broken glass in her veins, through darkness that tried to pull her back down. She focused on the chiming and on the promise and on the simple truth that someone was waiting for her. That alone was worth fighting for. In the medical bay, the monitors started screaming alerts, not warnings of failure this time. Warnings of change. Hana's heart rate spiked, her brain activity surged. Haijin ran to the suspension tank and checked the readings with shaking hands. She's responding! Her body is healing faster than should be possible. Whatever they're doing, it's working. The Velthrin song grew louder, more insistent. The cubs pressed closer to Hana's body, their small forms glowing so bright it hurt to look at them. Outside, the hundreds of adult Velthrin raised their voices in a sound that shook the colony's foundations. Every piece of crystal in Haven Prime resonated in sympathy. Then the cubs stopped singing. The sudden silence was deafening. The adult Velthrin stopped too, their voices cutting off as one. In that perfect quiet, everyone in the medical bay held their breath and waited. Hana's eyes opened. She took a breath on her own, without the machines. The monitors showed stable readings across every vital sign. Impossible but real, she was awake, she was alive. Slowly, painfully, she turned her head and saw 3 small shapes pressed against her. Soul, Nova, Echo, Hana whispered. Her voice was rough from days of disuse, but it worked. You waited for me. The cubs made their chiming sounds, bright and happy and relieved. They climbed onto her carefully, mindful of her injuries, and pressed their faces against hers. Echo purred like distant thunder. Nova touched her cheek with a soft paw. Soul made a sound that was almost like laughing. Hana saw her pilot headgear on the pillow and understood. They'd kept the ritual, kept the promise alive even when she couldn't, even when she was dying. Tears ran down her face, but she was smiling. I told you I'd wake with the dawn, she said softly. I always keep my promises. Outside, the Velthrin began to move away from the walls, not fleeing, withdrawing respectfully. Their task was complete. The human who had shown kindness to their young had been saved. That was enough. They returned to the crimson wastes in small groups, their fur still glowing softly in the darkness. Minho watched them go from the window and felt something change inside him. He'd spent months seeing Velthrin as enemies, as monsters in the dark. But what he'd witnessed tonight wasn't monstrous, it was beautiful. Hundreds of alien creatures working together to save one human life. Not because they had to, because they chose to. Because loyalty and love weren't limited to one species. Haijin examined Hana carefully over the next hours. The injuries that should have killed her were healing remarkably fast. Broken bones mending, internal bleeding stopped. Even her fractured skull showed signs of knitting together. It was unprecedented. Impossible, but the medical scanners didn't lie. How do you feel? Haijin asked. Like I died and came back, Hana said honestly. She held Echo against her chest, the small cub's warmth seeping into her, which I think I did. They brought me back? All of them, the cubs and the adults outside, they saved me. You saved them first, Minho said from the doorway. 3 orphan cubs that everyone said should be killed. You saw something we all missed. I saw children, Hana replied simply. And children deserve to be protected. Even if they're different, even if they're dangerous, even if nobody else understands. Word spread through Haven Prime fast. The human who flew through a Velthrin swarm had been saved by Velthrin song. The aliens everyone feared had just performed a miracle. People came to the medical bay to see for themselves. They watched Hana with the cubs curled around her and saw something that changed them. Not monsters, not enemies. Just living beings capable of grief and joy and loyalty and love. Just like humans, just different. Daeon visited that evening and sat beside Hana's bed. The colonial government wants a full report on what happened. They're calling it unprecedented. Some of them want to study the Velthrin. Others want to weaponize this somehow. Turn the resonance into a tool. No, Hana said firmly. Echo made a sharp protective sound. What happened here was about connection, about trust. You can't weaponize that. You can't study it like it's a resource. You can only respect it. I agree, Dayon replied, which is why I'm recommending you as Haven Prime's first xenobiological liaison. Someone needs to bridge the gap between humans and Velthrin. Someone they'll trust. Someone who's already proven they understand. Hannah looked down at Sol, Nova, and Echo. They looked back with their large eyes, content and safe. She thought about the hundreds of Velthrin who'd answered their call. Who'd saved her life? Who'd shown her that intelligence and compassion existed in forms humanity hadn't expected. I'll do it, Hannah said, but on one condition. We stop building on their sacred sites. We stop treating them like animals. We start treating them like what they are, people, just different people. Agreed, Dayon said. She offered her hand, and Hannah shook it carefully, mindful of her healing injuries. Outside the window, the last of the Velthrin disappeared into the wasteland. But Hannah knew they weren't gone. 3 months passed, and Haven Prime changed in ways nobody expected. Hannah recovered faster than any doctor predicted. Within weeks she was walking. Within a month she was working again. The cubs grew alongside her, now the size of medium dogs with crystalline fur that caught every light. They still slept beside her pilot headgear every night. Some rituals were too important to abandon. Hannah's first task as xenobiological liaison was mapping Velthrin sacred sites across Velthrin. She took Minho with her. Along with Sol, Nova, and Echo, what they discovered rewrote everything humanity thought they knew about the planet. The Velthrin weren't randomly scattered across the wastes. They lived in organized communities centered around crystal formations that resonated with specific frequencies. These formations were their temples, their schools, their hospitals. Every human colony had been built on top of at least one sacred site, sometimes 3 or 4. We destroyed their entire civilization without even knowing it existed, Minho said quietly. They stood on a ridge overlooking a massive crystal structure that hummed with electromagnetic energy. Dozens of Velthrin moved around it, tending to their young and caring for their old. We thought we were colonizing empty land. We were actually destroying cities. Hannah watched the Velthrin community below and felt shame wash through her. Humanity prided itself on being explorers and scientists, but they'd acted like conquerors. They'd seen something they didn't understand and decided it didn't matter. How many species had they hurt this way? How many more would they hurt if nothing changed? We can't fix what we destroyed, Hannah said. But we can stop destroying. We can build something new. She spent the next weeks in negotiations with Velthrin elder groups. Communication was difficult. The Velthrin language was mostly sound-based with complex layers of meaning in different frequencies. But Sol, Nova, and Echo helped translate. They'd grown up with both human speech and Velthrin song. They could bridge the gap in ways pure humans or pure Velthrin couldn't. The first treaty took 2 months to complete. Humans agreed to abandon any colonies built on sacred sites. The Velthrin agreed to stop attacking human settlements that respected boundaries. New building zones were established in areas without resonance structures. Shared spaces were created where both species could interact safely. It wasn't perfect, but it was a beginning. Not everyone was happy with the changes. Some colonists refused to evacuate their homes, even when they were built on Velthrin temples. Some Velthrin groups refused to accept human presence at all, remembering too many deaths. Hannah spent her days mediating conflicts and proving that coexistence was possible. It was exhausting work that never seemed to end. But every small success felt like a victory. Station 7 was the first colony to fully integrate with Velthrin neighbors. Commander Teeman opened the station's walls and allowed Velthrin to enter freely. The first few days were tense. Guards kept their hands near weapons. Velthrin moved carefully, testing boundaries. But children broke the ice. Human kids were curious about the crystalline aliens. Young Velthrin were curious about the strange two-legged creatures. They played together in the sand, making up games that didn't need words. Their parents watched and slowly relaxed. Jiwan started a transport service that employed both human and Velthrin crew members. Velthrin navigation skills were incredibly useful in Velthrin IX's dust storms. Human mechanical knowledge kept ships running. Together they made a better team than either species alone. Other businesses followed the example. Mixed crews became normal, then common, then expected. Haven Prime took longer to change. The memories of the swarm attack were too fresh. Too many people had lost family or friends to Velthrin claws. But Hannah was patient. She brought Sol, Nova, and Echo to schools and showed children that Velthrin could be gentle. She invited Velthrin healers to work with human doctors, demonstrating how their resonance abilities could help with surgery and diagnosis. Slowly, fear turned to curiosity. Curiosity turned to understanding. 6 months after Hannah's recovery, Haven Prime held its first joint festival. Human and Velthrin families gathered in a new shared plaza built on neutral ground. There was music from both species. Food from both cultures, though their dietary needs were different. Games that anyone could play. Children of both species ran around together, their laughter sounding remarkably similar despite coming from different types of throats. Hannah stood at the edge of the plaza with Sol, Nova, and Echo. They were fully grown now, as large as ponies, their crystalline fur glowing in the evening light. Echo still stayed closest to Hannah, pressing against her leg. Nova investigated everything, greeting both humans and Velthrin with equal enthusiasm. Sol had become a leader among the younger Velthrin, teaching them about humans the way Hannah had taught him. "You did this?" Dayan said, joining Hannah at the plaza's edge. "A year ago, humans and Velthrin were killing each other. Now look at them." "I didn't do it alone," Hannah replied. She put her hand on Echo's head and the cub purred. Sol, Nova, and Echo did most of the work. They were willing to trust me when their species had every reason to hate humans. That trust changed everything. Still, the colonial government wants to recognize your work. They're creating new protocols for first contact situations. They're calling it the Hannah Protocol. Approach with empathy first. Understand before judging. See people instead of threats. Hannah smiled but shook her head. The Velthrin have a word for what happened between us. Minho translated it. It means something like the bridge that grows from both sides. That's what real peace is. Not one side convincing the other. Both sides building together. A young Velthrin approached nervously, followed by a human child about 8 years old. They both looked at Hannah with wide eyes. The human girl spoke first. "Are you really the lady who flew through the swarm? The one the Velthrin saved?" "I am," Hannah said gently. "My teacher says you kept a promise," the girl continued. "To 3 little cubs. And that's why they saved you. Because you were kind to them." The young Velthrin made a series of chimes. Sol translated with his own sounds. Hannah had learned enough of the language to understand. The young Velthrin wanted to know if humans really kept promises like the story said. If they could be trusted. "Humans try to keep promises," Hannah said honestly. "We don't always succeed. We make mistakes. Sometimes big ones. But the important thing is that we keep trying. And when we break a promise, we try to make it right." The girl and the young Velthrin looked at each other. Then, carefully, they reached out and held hands. Or hand and paw. The gesture was universal. Friendship transcended species. They ran off together toward the games, already chattering about which one to try first. Sumin found Hannah an hour later. The pilot was fully recovered from her injuries now, back to flying cargo runs. But the experience had changed her. She volunteered as an advocate for mixed crew hiring policies. She taught young pilots about Velthrin communication. She never forgot Jiho's sacrifice or what Hannah had done. "Got something for you," Sumin said. She handed Hannah a datapad. "It's the final casualty report from the swarm attack. Updated numbers." Hannah read through the data. 8,000 colonists saved. 217 wounded. 34 dead. Every name on that list hurt. Every loss mattered. But 8,000 people were alive because she'd flown through hell. Because Jiho had sacrificed himself. Because Sumin had fought beside them. The numbers would have been very different without that mission. The memorial ceremony is next week, Sumin said quietly. They want you there. Want you to say something about Jiho? I will, Hannah promised. She looked at the names of the dead and felt the weight of them. Promises came with costs, sometimes terrible costs. But the alternative was worse. The alternative was giving up, letting fear win. That night, in her new quarters at the Joint Research Station, Hannah prepared for sleep. The room was different from her old one at Station 7, bigger, with windows made of crystal that Velthran architects had designed. The walls hummed softly with residual energy from the resonant structures built into the foundation. It was beautiful in a way that only happened when two species worked together. Sol, Nova, and Echo arranged themselves around her bed like they'd done every night for months. But now the door was open and other Velthran often visited. A network of family and friends from both species. The cubs weren't isolated orphans anymore. They were part of something larger. Something new. Hannah placed her pilot headgear on its usual spot. The helmet was scratched and dented from the crash, but she'd never replaced it. It carried too many memories. Too many promises. Echo immediately moved close to it, the old ritual still important despite all the changes. Tomorrow at dawn, Hannah said softly. Just like always. Echo chirped in response. Sol and Nova added their sounds. Outside, she could hear other Velthrans singing their evening songs. Human voices mixed with them, people learning the words or humming along. The sound was strange and beautiful. Proof that different didn't have to mean separate. Hannah closed her eyes and let herself rest. She dreamed of flying through storms. Of 3 small cubs waiting patiently. Of promises that cost everything but meant even more. When she woke at dawn, Sol, Nova, and Echo were already awake, watching her with patient eyes.